Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about application security. Is eating cloud security for lunch, or is it? I think that's the question that we are here to battle it out. And I've got some incredible panelists. I think most of you would probably recognize these faces, but I did want to do a quick little intro. So we do have Caroline. Now, Caroline is the Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt. She's done a lot of really incredible things. She is a regular speaker at many conferences. And she's been in the space for a very long time. She used to have a podcast as well, Humans of InfoSec podcast, and has done lots of really incredible things. So we're very lucky to have Caroline on the panel today. We also have Tanya. So many people may already know Tanya, but Tanya obviously has been in the application security space for a very long time. She's written a really incredible book that I get referenced all the time, and it's a go-to book for application security. She's also the founder of We Hack Purple and She Hacked Purples, and she's done a plethora of things on application security. So I'm very, lucky to have her on the panel as well and fighting in the application security court. And last but definitely not the least, we do have Ashish, who runs the Cloud Security Podcast. If you are in the cloud security space, you've probably heard about Cloud Security Podcast. He used to be a CISO in his previous life and has been in the cloud security space for a long time as well. So, and I think he will try his best to defend cloud security, it seems. But the intention really is obviously there is a lot of conversation in the market about application security, cloud security. Are they the same? How are they different? What do you do when you have both things in your organization? Is one more important than the other? Is there a way to combine them? So there's a lot of conversations. And so we thought, it's a great idea to just get some experts in the room and really sort of have an honest conversation about what is happening. Is application security truly eating cloud security or not? And that's what we're hoping to do today. So we'll kick things off. And thank you, Tanya, Caroline, and Ashish for joining us. I think just to level the playing field, I did want to sort of set the level in terms of what is cloud security and what is application security. Obviously, we hear these terms very often, but we will switch things around a little bit because I'm sure Tanya and Caroline, you've spoken a lot about application security, and Ashish, you talk about cloud security. So I want to just ask, maybe we'll start off with you, Tanya. How would you describe cloud security?
Thank you, Shilpi. Okay, so I like to think of cloud security as all the normal operational things that you would do in a regular data center, except they're happening in the cloud, plus cool cloud native security stuff. So not only do we have to patch virtual machines, but now we have this whole world of DevOps where we have immutable infrastructure, we have containers all over the place. There's probably a lot of Kubernetes occurring. And so all of the cloud native features, securing those, plus the security features that come within each cloud platform, plus all the regular stuff you'd have to do. So I feel it's like operations and then some. What do you think? What do you think? I feel like Carolyn's coming next, isn't she?
Yes, she is.
Super excited to be here with you all today. I was hoping to have a very controversial discussion today, and I hope that we do get very controversial. But just at the start, I have to agree with Tanya entirely. The way that I think about it also is if you're planting a vegetable garden, I think of the network as preparing the soil, which requires a lot of work, and then the application as being the actual plants, the actual produce that you're growing. And the thing about the soil is you can do it yourself. You can do it in the cloud. I'm actually kind of thinking like those community shared gardens. But anyway, I like to introduce a fun analogy or two to accompany some of the really accurate technical description.
Yeah, I love it, Caroline. I think you definitely caught a lot of hearts with that analogy. I know, I can see Tanya gleaming because for those of you who don't know, Tanya is a very avid gardener. and she's all things cybersecurity and gardening. So you definitely got her vote with this one. And I know Caroline has some really amazing analogies. I remember with the last panel we ran that you were talking about how to, encourage your kids with like lollies and chocolates and all of that. So I love it. I think you should maybe like write a book about all the cybersecurity analogies. So that's truly a skill. Like, how do you drill down like complex cybersecurity knowledge? Ashish, over to you now. I know you talk about cloud security all the time, but what about application security? How would you describe that to people?
I'm going to stretch the analogy from Caroline from the gardening perspective out of respect for Tanya over here. I would say it's almost like the plants that you put in your garden, if they are safe to consume, like AKA your supply chain, AKA also known as whether the ingredients that you're putting in, whether it's fertilizer or I'm going to butcher a few things. I don't know what else goes into this, but I'm sure there are other things that go into planting trees, but fertilizer is the only thing I could think of. So it would be, in my mind, application security is more ensuring that what you're putting out there for people to consume is safe for people to consume, and they can trust what's being consumed is accurate. I hope I did not butcher the analogy and I did not make a fool of myself as I revealed that I'm not a great plant person.
I think Tanya might send you a message later on. I hope we don't keep having these. So I think
fertilizer,
people
water, sunlight.
Love and affection. Yes, I think that's truly.
So
thanks for that, Kavita. Thanks for the comment. And also, I think while I saw the comment, I did want to say anyone who's watching the webinar, if you guys do have any questions, obviously, we want to have this interactive. While we do have some questions that we will go through, definitely, any questions from the audience is something we would love to take. So feel free to pop them as well if you do have any questions. Now, we have kind of defined what cloud security and application security is. And obviously, this whole conversation is about application security and cloud security. So I guess we do want to understand, where do these things intersect, and are they related or are they not related? Why are we having this conversation in the first place? Tanya, we may start with you if that's okay. Like, where do you see these two worlds colliding?
Oh my gosh. So I feel like when you do AppSec, you end up, so your app sits on the cloud quite often. If the cloud is not properly secured and then your app gets hacked, you still look really dumb. So as an AppSec person, I kind of stress out if I don't know what the cloud security team's up to and if they're handling everything. I also find that sometimes certain things sort of end up falling to me. So for instance, I'll play with the DevOps pipelines and hang out with the DevOps folks a lot. So then I'm the one scanning the infrastructure as code when maybe that's sort of a cloud security job. So I feel like sometimes we'll bang into each other a bit. Like, I'm like, if you guys want to do that, that's cool. But if no one's doing it, I'm going to do it because it needs doing. And so I feel like we can kind of collide on where things need to be scanned or where things need to be changed, or even just, is that my job or their job? Like, I've worked at places where they're like, no, APIs are the ops people. And I'm like, well, are they custom APIs? Because then they're mine. And so not that I want more work, but do you know what I mean? So I feel like sometimes you have to kind of delineate whose job is what. And I also think there's like quite a different skill set involved too. And when I moved from we're waterfall and we're on-prem, I had to learn so many operational things I didn't know. I did not understand, like, I knew firewalls existed. I didn't want to configure one though, right? And so there was quite like a learning curve I found as we went to the cloud, even though I wasn't supposed to be in charge of that. I don't know. What do other people, is that question only for me, or does everyone else get to chime in?
No, I think as you said, like there are a lot of blurring lines as well, and I would love to hear what the others have to say. So Caroline, do you have a take on this as well?
So y'all know me, I'm with the analogies. I think that in a way, CloudSec and AppSec, they're like roommates sharing a house. Each of them has their own domain that is really specific, but there's part domain that is actually shared. And what's got to happen ideally is there's communication about it. I remember there was this point back in the day where I had a lot of roommates and we had these discussions over like, are we going to watch The Bachelor or are we going to watch the football game? And we had to kind of come up with a compromise. But whatever goes on kind of in your separate rooms is like completely your own business. So I do think that they are so interrelated that ideally you've got folks who are communicating effectively, but it is somewhat inevitable that you're going to have conflicts from time to time, and there's going to have to be some kind of compromise.
That's another very good analogy, and I was going to throw to you next, Ashish. What do you think about these roommates living together?
I feel like I'm going to keep extending analogies now. Like, Caroline would suggest an analogy. I'll keep extending the analogy. I was going to think of a co-working space analogy. I think I don't think I have the best roommate experience or housemate experiences, especially when they leave dirty dishes everywhere. And I should kind of have a conversation like, who's left the dishes, considering there are only 2 people in the house. If I haven't left, then there's definitely the only other person who could have left that is right next there, but apparently someone keeps leaving them. The reason I use the co-working analogy is also because there is I guess in a lot of ways, there is separation in what they are doing as well. Like infrastructure is, I guess people who work in the infrastructure space are coming more from networking and all of that, like a very server kind of focus. So they probably are not even aware of how complex the application security world is. They would not have the nuance for it. They would have not gone through the nuance of understanding, hey, if I find a Java vulnerability, how am I explaining this to a developer? What they understand is a tool gave me a vulnerability and I just have to kind of show it to someone who probably understands this more than I do. And that, which is kind of where the conflict kind of comes in, where, hey, AppSec, can you look at this? I think the lines are blurring in the context now that co-working space, I'm going to use a WeWork analogy, considering it's so hot topic at the moment, where WeWork is going down under. I think soon, if it was like when the crisis time comes in, which in our case would be a security incident, suddenly everyone has to work together and like, okay, what are we doing? What's going to happen? I think that's when you really understand how blurry the lines are, because you can't troubleshoot an incident without understanding the server, without understanding the application, without understanding the overall context of it. So everyone kind of comes together. That's one part of it. The other part is we're all still working in the same co-working space. We still have our own goals. I can't ask an AppSec person to kind of start building servers, which is not fair. Like, hey, but at the same time, AppSec person asking, can you build the infrastructure is probably not fair as well. So I think to what Caroline mentioned, there's definitely defined roles for where this would not blur at all. But there's also I guess a point in time where most organizations, when there are, whether it's point to incident or whether they're at that scale where they can start seeing, I think at least in the team that I had, we had product security. We had that specifically from a context of, I did not have a lot of budget for an AppSec person. I had one AppSec person, but I had 3 infra plus people. So how do I balance that out as well? Because it started off as hey, we are AWS, great infra. But when you start doing more AppSec, suddenly it's like, oh, how do I scale AppSec when I can't find a good AppSec person, even though I had the budget for it? So I kind of had to come up with a product security team and thing, and it kind of worked well in that context until you got the budget for the second AppSec person. So that could be also a reason where companies probably find that the lines are blurring because they're trying to scale out their AppSec, but they don't have another resource. Hopefully that made sense. I just kind of get through a lot of examples.
No, examples are good, and I think it leans quite well in terms of the next question that I had in mind. But before I go into that, we did have a question from Kavita. She's saying that with more apps being moved to the cloud, AppSec is embedded in cloud security. Am I right? Tanya, do you want to have an opinion on that? Or maybe not.
No, I do want to have an opinion on it. I would say it depends. So I've worked where as the AppSec person, I'm sort of embedded with the team. And then most of the time I've worked where I'm not, but usually it would be embedded with devs, not within the cloud security team. But maybe I should rephrase this. So I'll be on the security team and I'm the only AppSec person, and the cloud security people are on the same team as me. And so if that's what you mean by embedded, then yeah, like we're all on the same security team. But I would say that I find it's usually a different job, even if sometimes we step on each other's toes, unless you're in a really small company where you're like, I am the security team, and you're like the whole team. That's hard. I've never been the whole security team, but I have been the whole AppSec team numerous times. I want Semgrep to make shirts that say, I am the AppSec team. Because I would say like half the time it's one person.
Yeah.
What do you
correct.
think?
I was gonna
Ashish?
challenge that a bit. Interactive team or same team, got it. Okay, but I was gonna say that I think it's interesting. The nuance of this is also because based on I feel like the cloud context where say people are using platform as a service, where technically, yeah, AppSec is part of the product team, but there's no CloudSec person needed because cloud has been taken care of by the cloud service provider and security of it has been taken by the cloud service provider. Maybe that is also another example where you can assume it's already integrated or embedded in that context as well. I mean, it's funny. I think these days there's so much nuance to compute as well. You could talk about Kubernetes and containers, and again goes back to like both of you are super amazing in AppSec and lower cloud security as well. The more I see it as well, like I cannot be an AppSec person because I think there is so much to learn. So I feel the complexity of how people are either shaping their team to what you called out. 100% agree on that. The second one that I thought was the whole complexity of the type of application where it's hosted. Maybe also another way you could have it embedded as long as it's provided by the cloud provider. I don't know, Caroline, do you have some thoughts as well?
I think,
Analogy.
yeah, from my perspective, I think of dev and ops, and I think of AppSec being more owned by dev and CloudSec being more owned by ops. That being said, we've got DevOps people like SREs. So I actually think there's quite a bit of variability. I think actually Shilpi's next question for us is going to actually dive even deeper into this topic that Kavitha has brought up for us.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right. And I think we're leaning really nicely into what we were wanting to sort of, get into it is that conceptually, all these things are great. We're talking about all these silos and variabilities, but at the end of the day, I guess when we look at like, devs in the teams or we look at security people, at the end of the day, they all pretty much have the same goal. They're trying to build stuff, fast, make sure, they've got their products and services out, but they also want to do it securely. So when we're coming to a real life scenario, people just want to do, how do I do this all securely? I don't care if it's AppSec or CloudSec. I just want to run my business securely, make sure I'm getting my products out. So how do we approach all of this like holistically in the real world? Caroline, if we can start with you on that one.
Sure. So actually, I also at the same time want to acknowledge Kavitha's most recent post, which is to recognize that it is totally different skill sets, and one of the things that security people love to do is they love to write these like 100-page long standards and best practices documents. And I have to say, and here's, I get to bring a little bit of my controversial energy to the webinar, which I did promise, which is to say, I think that these sometimes do us an enormous disservice. Something like the BSIM model, Building Security and Maturity Assessment, which is very focused on software and application security. I happen to love the BSIM, but for folks who are not intimately familiar with it, the fact that it has more than 100 security activities can get really kind of overwhelming. On the cloud security side, we've got lots of very detailed guidance from organizations like the Cloud Security Alliance, CSA. Again, in some cases, really just so many things. I actually think that it's possible to boil down all of what seems like super complex, super complicated to a few simple security concepts. At the end of the day, with both application security and cloud security and product security, my perspective is there's really only 4 things that anyone needs to be thinking about. Thing 1, find security problems. Thing 2, fix security problems. Thing 3, prevent security problems. I actually skipped thing 0, which has to do with governance, knowing what your assets are in the first place. Whether we're talking about AppSec, CloudSec, you still just have to do those things. And what's really important is clear ownership, because sometimes it's actually easy to find security problems. Finding security problems is kind of easy. Fixing and preventing security problems is what can be really hard. And so the most important thing in doing this effectively is clear ownership, Like, who owns the thing, who can actually fix the thing, and strong cross-functional communication. Because whether we're talking about a WeWork analogy or a roommate analogy, if you're not really sure who's in charge of fixing the thing, it's probably not going to get fixed.
Yeah, you're
Someone
very
has
right.
washed
And I
their
like,
dirty dishes.
yes, that's very, very right. And I love, like, how you've just simplified it all, because at the end of the day, we think about cybersecurity being very complex, and there's all these different like pathways. But I think what you've said is very true. It is about, like, knowing what the problem, and you're very right. Often that is the easiest thing, because we've got so many things that tell you, these are all your vulnerabilities, but how do you fix them? And better yet, how do you prevent them? So that's a really good stance. Tanya, did you want to sort of, because I know you've been involved with a lot of organizations actually implementing this in real life, and you've been on the forefront of all of this. What is your take on, like, to add to what Caroline has said?
I love that you started with inventory. Yes, it is such a hard problem in our industry, and there's finally tools coming out that don't suck. So I agree with Caroline. And then usually what I like to do is, when I work with companies, is we set goals. So we talk about like their concerns as a business, like things that are really important to them. And then we start with detecting problems around those areas, and then fixing and then preventing problems around those areas. And so our goals might be, we want to have this level of security assurance, and like these 5 systems are the most important systems, and the other 120 systems are less important. And like, this is our mission, and we need to protect our mission. And then like choosing your activities and your tooling based on that. Like, what way do you like to work? Well, we like to do DevOps. Well, then you need a different tool set than if you like to do waterfall and you're doing embedded medical devices that like can only be updated if there's surgery, right? Like, so I feel like, so definitely, just like Carolyn said, like, figure out what you've got, find problems, fix problems, then work. Then when you have enough time to be proactive to prevent problems. But I think too, like, each business's concerns are different. And I know eventually we're going to get to, how do I know we've done enough? But I think this is a lot of businesses are like, well, can't I just have a checklist of exactly what to do? It's like, you can, but it won't be right for you. Like, are you defending the democracy for your nation? Or are you like selling pajamas with Pikachu on them only around Christmas time? And there's different risks. And so
They would still look cute though.
Yeah. What do you think, Ashish?
Oh, no, I mean, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. I was just, I 100% agree. And I think this is probably one, and I would start with saying I definitely agree with both what you and Caroline said, that finding the application owner, irrespective of a cloud security problem or an AppSec problem, you definitely find that as the biggest challenge. Not because people don't want to be involved, but I think for context, for people who are listening to this as well or watching this, sometimes the application are built, they do a great job, people forget about them, and they just leave in the background because they just work. One day, after 5 years, there's an issue. The person who created it, worked on it, left the organization, and now suddenly there's a security incident, but no one knows who to talk to. So there are genuine reasons as well sometimes. But then there are also reasons where people just don't want to deal with it, because I think one of the organizations that I worked for, they had this product made 15 years ago, and there are certain parts of it no one would touch, just because they're like, no one knows what's going to happen. So let's not make any change in that. So there would be actual parts of your organization with that, as you work in it, you realize, no, we don't touch that. We don't talk about that. We don't touch that. We just leave it as it is. It works. So there is those reasons as well why there's no product owner, where there are parts that just cannot be changed. So that creates even more silos as we kind of continue spending more years not touching that part, and then you have Windows, 98 still sitting on a server somewhere, which it just happens to be deep in your network, so no one can actually attack it apparently. So, how does that work? How does it work magic?
I love that, like, Jay, for calling. Yeah, sometimes cybersecurity can feel like we're doing magic a little bit, or hoping that there would be some magic to, solve our problems. I think Tanya made a good comment, and I think, like, listening to all of this, all the things that you guys have recommended, often, you know, like, and we hear this, and I know, Tanya, you've mentioned this in the past, that a lot of cybersecurity leaders, when they're running an organization, you know, they've got this list of things, you know, they've got legacy applications, as Ashish was talking about. How do people measure that? Am I doing enough? Because, you know, there's always like cybersecurity in an organization can feel like a mammoth to deal with. And I might start with you, Tanya. Like, how do you feel? Like, how can a cybersecurity leader go, yep, I'm doing enough? Like, how do they measure that as a point of success?
Okay, that is a question that I constantly work with clients with. Okay, so we need to figure out like what keeps them up at night and what they're concerned about and how to make them feel confident that they are safe. And so, for instance, I worked at Elections Canada and I was the CISO for the election across Canada in 2015. And so there's concerns I can't talk about, but a really obvious concern that they are very open about is voter suppression. And so they're worried that people will try to trick Canadian citizens into thinking they can't vote, to be afraid to vote, that it's the wrong day to vote, etc. And so that's one of their major concerns. And so we set up systems around that to defend against that, to protect against that, and to measure to make sure it was working. So that's a key. So like just because you put a safeguard in place does not mean it's working. And so you need to measure to make sure that it is. And so we actually ran an entire pretend election 6 months before the real election, where we actually built an office. We invited hackers. We did all sorts of terribleness. We like pretended to get malware. We did all this stuff. And then we did a postmortem and fixed every single thing. And so by the time election day came, it was funny. My boss came up and put his hand on my shoulder. He's like, Tanya, you can chill out. Everything you did worked. Today's going to be boring because your team did a great job. And it was true. The day was like boring because nothing bad happened. And I was just like,
Gosh.
And so when you can get to that point where you're like, I know I'm good, you've done enough. And so this means not only so like, just to stress again, not only putting safeguards in place, but like setting goals based on the things you're worried about and common things that the whole industry worries about as well. Measuring yourself against those goals and then feeling confident or not confident based on those results, and questioning and testing your safeguards as well, which I'm sure Caroline, because she works at a pen testing company, she knows all about. But just because you have a safeguard doesn't mean it's working. Sorry, I was teaching that this morning.
No, that's amazing. And I love the fact that you've actually like put a real life example to it, because that really sort of spells out what this could mean in real life and how to sort of tackle it. And I'm glad you had a very boring day. Like a good day in cybersecurity is a boring day, isn't it? Like we just don't want too much excitement. Ashish, if I throw the same question to you, what would your perspective be? Like how, because I know you speak to a lot of CISOs and stuff as well. Like how do you make them feel like they're doing enough?
So a lot of the challenges in the cloud security conversation usually comes from the fact that every year, and I don't suppose it's different in AppSec as well, but there's a lot of information that's shared by the cloud provider. And it kind of leaves a lot of people confused as to, hey, do I need this? Because I think a great example for people who are probably listening to this or watching this and are looking forward to the AWS reInvent that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks, at least 50 announcements come out of it. A lot of developers would jump on it as services that they want to use and would like to kind of use as a way to improve application, maybe to what Jay called out, the magic for it finally reveal itself. And that opens a lot more complexity for a lot of people, because there's almost always this feeling of, I'm still catching up. I don't know if I need this. And I think, and AI kind of made it even more obvious, because suddenly the entire organization started using ChatGPT, and I'm like, oh, how do we limit this? We do want people to be innovative, but at the same time, how do we manage the risks that we're exposing ourselves to? And it's not anyone's fault to feel that they haven't done enough. But usually, I'll go back to what Caroline mentioned earlier. If you know what inventory you have, if you are at least prepared for the potential threats you may think because of a threat model you may have run on application that are critical for you, and you've addressed most of them, and maybe AI brings another threat model, but at least because you've catered for the previous ones, the only one extra one you're catering for is an AI. It's not really, it doesn't really change dramatically from that perspective. So as long as you have confidence in that, you're doing a pretty awesome job. And if you verify whether the controls are actually working to what Tanya said, Yeah, I mean, I would say you can definitely go into a Christmas holiday without thinking about the fact that I think I left something. I left what's the most common one? I left the
I left
stove
the
on or
oven
something.
on.
Yeah. Well, in our household, you left the hair straightener on, so apparently there's that as well.
I'm sure there are members of the audience who can definitely relate to that one. Yeah, I need AI in my life to like make sure everything's turned off. Before I went into my other questions, Kavita actually had a really good question, and I'd like to throw this to the panelists as well. So, since the two domains are intertwined, how much AppSec, how much should an AppSec engineer know about CloudSec and vice versa? So, I think that's a very good question because I know there are people on both sides that want to learn more about one side or the other. Caroline, if I can throw that one to you to begin with, do you have a take on how much AppSec should a cloud security engineer know or vice versa?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think the most important thing to know is if it's not your area, who is your person that you can go to who is an expert in that area? I don't think it's reasonable for any of us to know everything about everything. You know, each of us here, we're literally talking on a panel about application security and cloud security. And there's tons of application security and cloud security stuff that each of us four don't know. But I'm sure that we have people on our teams and in our networks that we can go to ask questions. Ashish, your puppy is extremely, extremely cute. So while it's totally not possible to know everything, I think the most important part is to know who does know, and to also, I think there's kind of a respect thing involved. You know, I think that one of the things that I've seen over many years working in security is every once in a while you'll have a person who like read one blog post and they think they do know. And I think there's just an opportunity to be humble in some cases, to recognize like what's actually my responsibility and where does my decision making cover. And then for this other thing that may not be my area of expertise or not my direct responsibility, like whose actually is it? And then to collaborate. So that's a little bit more of like a people and process rather than a technical information thing. That being said, the more we each can learn about stuff that's very directly relevant to our roles or right next to our roles, the better for any of us.
Thanks for that, Caroline. I think
go for it.
Yeah.
I was gonna say you should go first.
Okay, so I agree with what Caroline said. I would also say that for cloud security, so if you're an AppSec engineer and you're working somewhere and everything's in the cloud, you want to know the basics of that cloud. So you want to know all the different security offerings that are included with your package so that you know they exist and just the gist of what they do. So like GuardDuty does this or Azure Defender does that. So you know that it exists. And ideally, if you could know a person or what team does that thing in case you need to know about it. I also want to know about how to deploy apps into that cloud. So are we using Azure and we're using Azure DevOps? Cool beans. Are we using GitHub and we're using GCP? Whatever the thing is, I want to know how to release apps into there. And then I want to know that the thing I'm releasing them onto to start is safe and secure, and that I'm releasing it into the place that I'm supposed to on the network. So I'm not like, oh, oops, I'm outside the firewall. So I want it, that would be bad, right? So I want to make sure that my dev team or dev teams that I'm helping are releasing in a way that is safe. Like I want to be able to scan the infrastructure as code if they're doing that to make sure it meets our policy. But then once it's out there in the world, I'm hoping the cloud security team is going to take over and make sure that that platform that it sits upon is going to continue to be safe, just like I'm going to continue to monitor that the app is safe, and I'm going to keep wanting to patch it and scan it and make sure it's okay. And so basically just like the main security features of the platform, and ideally, like if you really want to be awesome, like the big security tools that they use. And so like if you know they use like a SIM and its named Splunk or whatever, just knowing that they have that and that's what it does, you can say, oh, can I send my logs to Splunk? Just because you know that it exists. So just overall arching stuff, not deep knowledge in any of those. What do you think, Ashish?
I was going to say the same thing as well. I think and maybe another layer to put onto this as well, most of us would probably want to progress to the next role after that as well. So whether you are starting off as an AppSec person or a CloudSec person, if you're looking for that, say, next growth in your career as well, you probably would find that what Tanya and Caroline mentioned in terms of at least having an overall picture of how security works in your organization. Because say if there's a cloud security incident, how do you identify it's a cloud security incident? At least having a bare understanding for what's your boundary, for lack of a better word, in the context of the product you're trying to secure. And at what point am I involving someone like Caroline and Tanya to go, actually, this is kind of where my knowledge ends, and I don't know what happened beyond it. So those are usually a good starting point for, let's have a conversation with Tanya and Caroline, find out, okay, what are my gaps? And maybe through that conversation, you learn something new from an AppSec perspective. I would say, instead of being looking at this as I want to be a great AppSec and CloudSec person, I probably go, yep, this is where I'm starting. I love cloud security, or I love application security. I want to do more of that. The more you're gonna go start doing work in this space and we'll start working for organization, you'll see there's a lot of overlap in the kind of work you would do. And depending on the size of the organization, if it's an enterprise, you'd only do cloud security. Unfortunately, you would not do anything else. But if it's a small enough organization, you can definitely find that it is possible that you are learning through osmosis, through people around you who are just kind enough to share, oh, by the way, this is how I solve it. You would not be an AppSec awesome Java developer person, but you'd at least be good enough to at least have a conversation. Oh, I did see the serialization thing. I understand what that is. I think you should talk to Tanya about it, but I understand that's an application security problem, not a problem for cloud security, but I definitely can help with that. So I think that's, in my opinion, I think that's kind of where I would say the convergence happens, where you don't have to know everything, but just know enough to be dangerous that you can explain to someone as to what that is. But when it comes to the details of it, you basically go, okay, this is kind of where I draw the line. This is where my boundary is. And beyond this, it's someone who probably is a lot more deeply involved with this as well. But I think it's a great question overall. I would say, even from a career progression perspective, 100% knowing how security works in the organization, not just AppSec, CloudSec, SecOps, corporate security, whatever else you can learn, I would definitely try and at least understand those parts of the organization. Hopefully that helps. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kavita, that's a really good question, because I know a lot of people in the audience, and it's something that we hear as well, just, amongst our audience as well, that's something people want to know, like, how much should I know? There's so much to know. Where do I draw a line? And thanks, Caroline, Tanya, and Ashish, for I think you guys gave some really sort of tangible things that people can take back. And it's realistic. It's not about know everything. It's like, these are things that would be nice to know, but there are boundaries as well. And I liked what you said, Caroline, like, you can't possibly know everything, as much as some days it feels that they have to. There's another really good question from Chris, and I think it's a good time to probably tackle that one as well. So how do AppSec and CloudSec work together in a scenario that involves your customer systems? If, for example, you're in an ETL company that needs to connect to your customer's data warehouse and ingest that data into your application. Now, that's a very good question, because I can see that that's something that probably impacts a lot of people. Tanya, did you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, so usually like a software architect would come up with I think we're going to do it like this. Then an AppSec person generally comes along and threat models it and is like, can you add encryption here and add auth there and add this there and add that there? And then we ask the ops person, hey, is this possible? Can we do this? Is this cool with you? So whether it comes to the cloud security person first or comes to the application security person first, generally in my experience, it comes to me. And I'm the one reviewing it or brainstorming with them the solution. So either they come with a solution or together we're like, okay, so how about we send it like this and we do that? Is there an API, etc.? And then we threat model it. So that's the idea of going through each connection point and making sure it's safe, that it has all of the parts that it should. And then looking at the system as a whole, do we see any specific weird business logic types of threats that might happen here? And how can we prevent those? And then ops person, is this possible? And can you do it for me? So that's been my experience. What do the rest of you think? Because that's just the places I've worked. That's what we do.
I can probably talk more specific from a data security product as well. So I've done a big data project where we did a lot of ETL implementation for ML ops that we were deploying. One of the so what you would find, cloud security usually operates a lot more in the ML ops space, where you're building the infrastructure and I guess the bare bones of how your ETL system, or if you're I'm assuming you're trying to build an LLM or a big data project, what you would find is a clear boundary there as well for CloudSec is building the infrastructure with the DevOps team or the SRE team, and whatever's required from a security perspective, they'll get involved from that perspective. There's also an element of data security that you would find where, depending on the organization, you could be talking to privacy team, but also data sprawl, what kind of data is going to be put into the cloud in the first place. I would say if you run a threat model session, you probably would involve both people from both sides, like AppSec, CloudSec, and even people from a data perspective as well. Because the end goal is not the fact that we want to have the most secure system. End goal is to understand what threats we would potentially have that we need to protect this application from. And probably people who work directly with the application would know it better than the security person you may involve. So I would say in that context, AppSec, CloudSec should actually look at working with the actual development team or the SRE team on the other side to see what are some of the gaps that they need to fill from a security perspective. And as you kind of go through that process, at least what we realized was there's a clear delineation between the pipeline that's going to deploy the application, which still remains the same, whether it's a ETL, whether it's an ML application, or whether it's an LLM, doesn't really matter. As you go into more on the application side, what kind of data is going to be consumed that comes out of threat model, whether it's going to be internet facing, not internet facing, whether it's hopefully not using Node.js or NPM, whatever the thing would be, you'll find that it actually starts becoming a lot more clearer as you deep dive into a lot more of those conversations. But that's my experience, and I think I found that the overlap is still usually more in when you do the threat modeling rather than, hey, I'm going to build, if you're, again, PaaS, IaaS, again, can go into complexity we spoke about earlier, but that's pretty much what comes to top of mind, at least based on the experience I had in the past. Caroline, I don't know if you want to add something as well. Hopefully I didn't take your answer.
No, I think you two have it completely covered. I'm good. Thank you.
Perfect. No, thanks for that. And thanks for the question as well, Chris. I did want to say, like, everyone who's putting in questions, thank you so much for that, and keep them coming, because we love getting questions, and it's always good to sort of get another person's perspective. So keep them coming. We definitely are loving the questions.
For 1 second, the link that I put for the Slack, I'm sorry, it's broken. So I'm sorry, the Semgrep Slack link that I put isn't the right one. That's my mistake. But you can join our newsletter or just DM me your email and I'll invite you to our Slack. Sorry about that.
Oh, good. Yes, DM Tanya. So I think going back to something that Tanya, you were mentioning about, like making sure you're having a boring day and not having any security issues, and you did a great job. But often, we don't have boring days in cybersecurity. A vulnerability does get recognized. When a vulnerability does get recognized, like how does a team start to figure out like what they need to do? Like how do they start? What are some of the high level steps? Like once that does happen, what are some of the high level steps that we should be taking? Caroline, if I can start with that, if you can take our audience members on a journey of what happens when you find a vulnerability.
Absolutely. So first, I want to say that there are actually different levels of when a vulnerability has been identified. So in the case of, for example, a 0-day vulnerability, you're going to need to ask questions like, how do you find it? Is there a fix available? Another case may be in proactive security testing where you've determined that a vulnerability exists, but it's not currently believed to be exploited. A third category is when you've got a vulnerability, it's known it's being exploited by bad actors right now. So there are actually going to be quite different approaches in these different scenarios. I will kind of focus on the middle scenario, which is a vulnerability exists, you know about it because you've been doing security testing proactively, but you don't currently believe it's been exploited. Here, the really important thing, and you'll notice that I tend to focus a lot on the people and process aspects of these concepts. Find the owner, work with the owner and maybe their management to prioritize the work according to the risk. So more often than not, security people have not only found a vulnerability, but they've found a lot of vulnerabilities. And the folks who are in charge of fixing these vulnerabilities, whether they're dev folks, cloud folks, they've got other work to do. Typically determining when the work to fix the security problem is going to happen is actually ideally that's something that takes into account the risk. So it might involve what's the severity of the vulnerability, what's an associated SLA. I also think that in cases where an SLA is not going to be followed according to an organization's policy, then it is really important to ensure that the risk is acknowledged and signed off. Ashish, what do you think?
I was going to say, I definitely agree on. I'm trying to think, because I think you answered most of it. I think the most challenging part that I find is when people have not been doing proactive security, and then we kind of are in a situation where whether it's a high, medium, or low risk, what kind of risk is it? I would probably say if you have defined the risk, it's usually a quicker feedback loop, so at least get to know, oh, this is an incident, it's not an incident. The only angle the only opinion I would put into this is that if you're not doing this, in addition to all that, everything that Carolina's called out, if you're not doing proactive security, please start doing it. That's pretty much the only bottom line I would call out over here, because that is pretty much what you should care about. And most of us spend our entire cybersecurity career just trying to talk about proactive security and working towards it. But it's a dreamland that we're all trying to get to.
Okay. I have a few things to add. I want to go live in the dreamland with Ashish, but so if I find a vulnerability in a custom app, so if you have a tool and it reported it to you, generally it's going to tell you like, oh, this vulnerability is called this, or this is the problem. If it's a good tool, it should tell you how to fix it, like give you some high level instruction. But so this is a ridiculous trick that works really well. I go to my favorite search engine, I put in the name of the vulnerability, and then I add OWASP. And then I get awesome advice. The advice is just significantly higher quality if you just add OWASP, OWASP. They're an international nonprofit community, open source projects, chapters around the world, amazing conferences, awesome training. I'm a huge, super mega fan. Yes, so if you just add OWASP, your advice goes way up. And so then let's say that the vulnerability is in a library or third-party component that's in your app, things you can do are figure out if that vulnerability is reachable from your app. So this is a thing that like Semgrep has worked on recently, where it's like, okay, so you have these like 30 libraries, and 20 of them have a vulnerability in it, but only one of them are you calling the part of the library that has the bug. And so you can go and like, if you're not going to buy a tool, you can go and manually look, okay, so there's like 400 functions in this library. And the 2 or 3 that are vulnerable, I'm not calling them. So I'm probably okay, unless it's SolarWinds or Log4j, then you're just in trouble. But generally you're fine then, you're not exploitable then. So if you can go and do that work, then just fix those ones that are actually like either reachable or provably exploitable. And the rest of them, just put them in the backlog for later. Like, hey, if you're gonna do an update, it'd be really cool if you would update off this one, because there's sort of like a little time bomb inside your app right now. But so also figure out if it's worth fixing. Sometimes you've like an automated tool is like, this is wrong. And I'm like, I accept that risk. Like sometimes you do, sometimes you're like, you know what, that's actually fine. And so figure out if you want to fix it, then figure out if it's actually exploitable or vulnerable or reachable, and then go look on the internet. OWASP can generally help with a lot of things.
I was going to add something that made me think about something which people normally get confused about, especially in the cloud security space when it comes to incidents or vulnerability, is something called the shared responsibility model, where a lot of times a conversation would happen in terms of, hey, there's a vulnerability. 9 out of 10 times people might think, oh, actually, isn't that Azure or AWS? They're going to solve that for me. Why am I worried about this? It's important to understand the line for where we talk about the fact that, okay, now we've understood the shared responsibility model, that I care about everything from, depending on whether I'm using IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS, I obviously care about the most, which is the data. I care about infrastructure. I care about these things. I don't care about the data center, actual physical data center, at least not to a point. So I definitely want to harp on the fact that definitely look into shared responsibility model when you consider looking at a vulnerability from a cloud context. Secondly, if you are deploying applications, which obviously, and going back to the proactive thing, to what Tanya mentioned, at least understanding what part is vulnerable that you need to respond to helps you plan for the instant response as well that you need to have for at least a conversation about. Now, instant response in the cloud context is not something that is spoken about enough in the industry. So I would definitely say I would go, hey, we do that so that you can build a better instant response plan for any future vulnerability as well. But that I just wanted to call that out. So, but that good point, Tanya.
I actually wanted to add one more thing because Caroline mentioned 0 days. So sometimes like a vulnerability happens and it's in software you're using, like a library, a framework, or the operating system that your app is sitting on. There's another option. So like if there's no patch available, it's called a 0 day. There's no fix that you can go grab. If you have a content delivery network that your app is behind, or a web app firewall, a WAF, or a runtime application security protection tool, if you can get a copy of what the attack looks like for the thing you're worried about. So for SolarWinds and Log4j, this was a thing that I worked with companies on. You can get a copy of the exploit, same with Struts. Figure out what it looks like, make a regular expression that looks like that catches it, and then just put it on that CDN or web app firewall or whatever, and just block anything that because no legit request is going to look like that garbage. No legit business request is going to just be like, yeah, I'm going to have like just a bunch of code, right? And so that's another thing you could do to protect. It's not perfect, but it's like putting a great big band-aid on a wound while you are running around healing. And by that, I mean like updating your framework, waiting for Microsoft, whoever, to create the patch, whatever it is that you have to do. So that's another thing that you could do on top of that.
So are you saying we would know 0 days coming?
No, like once it's out and everyone's talking about it. Yeah. So if there's a 0 day actively being exploited in the wild that you're really concerned about, or for instance, I had a company I worked with and they found like 2 of their apps had like libraries that they just couldn't upgrade off of that were just in a really bad, like they were going to have to re-architect, do their entire app over, but the vulnerability was really scary and terrifying. And so for one of them, we bought all their customers' WAFs because they only had 4 customers, and we installed it and we put a regular expression to block that. And we just made it a part of their service. And then the other one, we ended up having to re-architect the entire app because struts, and we just couldn't let that risk sit. We just had to protect our customers. And so sometimes basically you can put a band-aid on things until things get better. But yes, we don't know about all the 0 days. Just if you know about it, you can do that.
Yeah, no,
Cool.
definitely. And I'm glad you guys have gone into like quite a bit of detail because, like vulnerabilities are probably the scariest things for cybersecurity folks. So I'm glad we've gone into quite a bit of information in regards to that and stuff that people can walk away with. We do have another question from Kirsten. If you're CloudSec and use infrastructure as code and third-party tools, is there an automatic overlap with AppSec if you're in CloudSec and would like to do more in AppSec? Any advice there? Might start with you, Tanya, on this one.
Okay, sorry. Where could you say the question again? Oh, there I see a general question. How do companies choose their tools? Oh, sorry.
No,
I was putting the newsletter in the chat because you're.
Wait, maybe I can step first, and then you can go for it. What do you guys think? Cool. So what I was going to say from a CloudSec perspective, if you're doing infrastructure as code or running third-party tools, what do you realize? The natural integration where at least AppSec happens usually is in a CI/CD pipeline. Not just from a perspective of you doing static analysis of the infrastructure as code itself, looking for whether secrets being leaked, secret management in general as well, which is a huge part of DevSecOps at the beginning. As someone who's trying to build or run a DevSecOps program, you'll find credential management or secret management is probably the easiest way for both the AppSec and CloudSec to overlap quite easily. On the other side of the AppSec side, same way when a product is being built in the cloud space, understanding the overlap for whether it's a CI/CD pipeline is going to be built in the cloud using a cloud native feature. Like Tanya mentioned Azure DevOps earlier, you could use AWS Core Pipeline or another version that is provided by the cloud provider, where you would have to work with a cloud engineer or cloud security engineer to, how do I secure this pipeline, which is provided, which is not Jenkins or which is not your regular CI/CD that you find on the internet. It's a one provided by the cloud provider themselves. That's when you would also find that there's an overlap for how you can work with AppSec, or at least learn those part of AppSec as well for, oh, this is what people do in a CI/CD pipeline to deploy application security. Is that even possible in a cloud native option? Like, I think that those are some that come to my top of mind, but I'm sure there's more. I don't know. Over to you, Tanya. I think now since you've there.
I would say ask the AppSec team what they need help with, and ask if you can job shadow them sometimes. It sounds weird, but like, so I was teaching earlier this morning and they're like, we need an AppSec coach. And that's the thing that I used to offer from We Hack Purple, where like I would just coach people into becoming AppSec professionals. And then of course we started our whole AppSec training program. But like, if you go and say to the AppSec team, like, listen, I'm super curious and like, I want to know more about AppSec. Is there somewhere where you think I can help? There's a strong likelihood they have 25 projects and only actually have time for 10. And so, or they have various responsibilities they're doing on the regular. So for instance, like maybe I'm going to go over stack analysis results. And it's like, just come hang out with me. I would say that's actually probably the most difficult one. So let's say I'm going to scan things with like a dynamic scanner and be like, pew, 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 pew. It's like, I could show you how to do that easily. Or like how to, so like, let's say we're rolling out a stack analysis tool and we want it to run in every CI/CD. So I show you how to put it in 1 or 2, and then you go off and put it in all the rest of them. And you become like the king or queen of SAST, right? And so like they definitely need help. I have not met an AppSec person that's like, oh, I'm so bored at work, I still don't have enough responsibility or stuff to do. I've never heard that. So if you go and offer help, I would say, especially ops people, they kick butt at releasing tools, rolling out tools, deploying tools really nicely. And so some tools you can just press a button and it'll scan your whole code repo, but most of them actually require like an intense dedicated time to deploy them, because you know each team needs a different thing. And so if you helped with that, you'd probably be their favorite new person. Just I would love help with that. Caroline.
I don't know that I have much to add at this point, honestly. And I think we're actually coming up to the time. I just want to say that I've enjoyed this thoroughly, and I've especially enjoyed all the questions from attendees today. Thank you. I've also, in the meantime, personally signed up for the Semgrep community resources. So really, really appreciate that, Tanya.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for that, Caroline. I have to echo your sentiments as well. And you're quite right. Like, we've come up to the hour so quickly. I knew this was going to be, as you said, Caroline, you were hoping for a good debate. And I think we've definitely had a very good discussion and, lots of conversations. And the questions have been amazing. We've gone super fast through the hour. I know there were still a couple of questions there that we would love to tackle. And I think, Kavita, you put it quite rightly. Probably we would need another discussion, because I don't think we can cover all the questions that we would like to. But no, thank you to all the panelists. Now, if people do want to sort of reach out to any one of you, I know like Semgrep actually does have a newsletter. So if you do want to sort of, keep the conversation going, do subscribe to that. I know the session is being recorded and that will be shared via the Semgrep newsletter as well. So if you've enjoyed this and you want to share it with, colleagues or people you think will get value from it, you can definitely do that by signing through the newsletter, or also like sharing it. I know Tanya's sort of popped it in the chat. But if people do want to find you, Caroline, like, where's the best place if you want to maybe plug in your thing or maybe just share it with the group?
Yeah, definitely. LinkedIn is the place to find me. And in particular, I am the instructor for a series of courses on the OWASP Top 10 for web applications. And I invite folks to check those out.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And Tanya, where can people find you if they want to talk more about application security?
So if you look up She Hacks Purple, so I'm shehackspurple.ca, or I'm at She Hacks Purple on basically every platform. On LinkedIn, I'm Tanya Janca, but you can only follow me. I'm not allowed more connections because LinkedIn is stupid. And it should obviously let you have way more friends than it's allowing. But yeah, if you just look up She Hacks Purple, I'm all over. And also I am one of the people that writes the Semgrep newsletter. So if you wanted to sign up and you're listening to this later, if you go to bit.ly and then just all lowercase, so /Semgrep newsletter, you can just join us there, or the Semgrep Slack. Yeah, that's it. How about you, Ashish?
Cloud Security Podcast. Or I think I'm fortunate enough to have, if you just search my name, you'll find me on the internet.
For good things, hopefully.
Enough content about me out on the internet, so just search for Ashish Rajan and you'll find me there.
Amazing. No, thank you so much, everyone. Obviously, all this information will be there on the newsletter. This will be recorded, so that'll be shared as well. But I did want to thank all our panelists. This was a great conversation, and I don't think this is going to, stop anytime soon. There are many questions that we have and many questions we wanted to go through. So maybe for next time. But thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for the incredible questions. They were really amazing to get through as well. But I wanted to thank everyone for their time.
And thank you, Shilpi, for great moderation.
Shilpi.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
you are the queen today. Thank you for taking care of us children over here as well. Thank you.
We kept the conversation flowing. But thanks, everyone. Hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time. See ya.
Bye.